Good afternoon and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. This is part 1 of 3. We've cut it up into shorter, about 25-minute sections so that we can get the dubbing in the 21 different languages, because I've had a lot of requests to make sure that I can dub all my videos. And so all 3 parts will be coming out. Today, I'm going to be bringing to you 5.5 years of experience growing our own food and growing enough for a year. I'm going to talk to you about some of our favorite vegetables and some of the easiest vegetables to grow and to get a whole lot of, and they're delicious and why, and I'll give you some advice for each. I'm also going to tell you about some of the vegetables that we're going to continue to grow, but we need to do things differently, and I'm going to tell you how we've done them and how we need to do them differently. And I'm also going to be telling you about some of the vegetables that we're not going to be growing anymore because we just don't think that it's worth the effort, and we can get what we need from those vegetables from plenty others, and we'll let you know what those alternatives are too. And I've got all these cue cards here to kind of help me remember everything that all the different things I want to talk about, because I'm always forgetting stuff. So if you're someone who's just getting into growing your own food, or you've been doing it for a while and you just want some really useful tips, really useful advice that's going to help you do better, grow better, get more food, get better food, get food that you can grow while you're respecting nature and while you're basically celebrating nature all around you and actually having nature help you. If this kind of thing interests you, then let's get started. So much to talk about. Let's start with peppers. Peppers, it's one of my favorite vegetables. We're definitely going to be continuing planting those, but there are a lot of very useful things to know when you're planting your peppers. For example, first of all, it's best to start them in small pots, and if you're in a cold climate, you start them in small pots indoors or in a heated greenhouse. Not in an unheated greenhouse, because it's going to be too cold in an unheated greenhouse. You get them started in small pots, but not too small. Okay, you'd probably the best size pot is about that big, that big, that tall, and so on. Anything smaller than that is too small. Why? Because your peppers need about 8 weeks before you transplant them out. And what you want to do is transplant them out when the danger of the last frost is long gone. Here, that's the beginning of June. Here in our 5B, 6A garden, it's the beginning of June. First week of June, that's when we transplant. For you, it might be at some other point. And so they need to last a long time in those little pots. And so if you put them in something too small, they're going to get stressed. And if they're starting their life out stressed, they're not going to grow as well in the garden after you transplant them. A few other things, tips that are really important with peppers. When your peppers start to form their fruit, okay, you're gonna see maybe lots of flowers and lots of fruit on each plant. When the fruit starts to get shiny like this, okay, and it starts to change color like this, all right, or even when it's still green but it's shiny, and you've got maybe a lot of different peppers on the plant, and you've got some really tiny ones, and you got flowers and so on. Pick some of those green ones. So long as they're shiny, or that they've started to change color, you'll be able to ripen them inside in a sunny window, let's say. And that way your plant's going to have more energy to finish ripening the remaining fruit. All right. Now, sometimes you will see, I don't have an example here, but sometimes you will see at the bottom of the pepper, all right, you'll see maybe a little spot, a little bit of rot, maybe a little bit of mold, or it's just gone a little black or discoloring, or the skin is dried. That's what we call, actually you can see a little bit of it right there, all right? That's either sunburn, or if it's down here, it's blossom end rot, and it's often caused because of stress from too much sun, too much heat. This past summer we had a drought, and so there was way too much heat, not enough water, not enough rain, and so some of these peppers got this. And it's important that you pick them, because they're not gonna ripen as well as the other ones, and the plant's gonna be trying to keep them healthy. So you pick those so that the plant has more energy for the rest of your peppers. And then you'll get more peppers. And then these ones that you pick that have those little spots on them, you ripen them inside, you cut those spots out, and you eat the rest that's still good, and you'll still get your peppers. Now, what else? Another good thing about peppers is they don't mind being crowded, as opposed to tomatoes. Tomatoes don't like being too crowded, especially in a rainy area. Tomatoes need their space so that the leaves can dry off and so on. Peppers don't mind it. In fact, peppers like being crowded because they like to give their fruit a little bit of shade with the leaves of the pepper plant itself, or of other pepper plants around it. Or maybe a few other plants like sunflowers you might have growing close by. Sunflowers are a good companion plant for peppers. Oh, one last thing about peppers. Really useful piece of advice. Okay, so we've got different types of peppers. We've got like bell-type peppers. This is a relatively small bell-type pepper, but this is another bell-type pepper right here. It looks kind of like a cross between a bell and maybe something longer and thinner. And then you got these types of peppers and these types of peppers, which kind of look like hot peppers, but both of these are sweet peppers. This is a tequila pepper, and this is a Jimmy Nardello pepper. Here's another Jimmy Nardello pepper right here. Now, what I want to say about these is, I love hot peppers. They're great. And what's great about hot peppers is a hot pepper plant will give you lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of peppers. But let's say a bell pepper will give you nice, big, juicy peppers, but it won't give you necessarily as many. Same with this kind. But hot peppers, for instance, this is a poblano. The plant gives you tons, okay, because it's a hot pepper. And then you've got these peppers here, which are sweet, but they kind of look like a hot pepper, and they behave like a hot pepper. These long, thin, sometimes curved, smaller peppers, the plant will give you lots and lots and lots. And so I highly advise you to grow those types of peppers if you want a huge, abundant harvest. And they seem to be more resistant to the bugs as well, just like hot peppers, because hot peppers are resistant to the bugs as well. So there you go. There's some advice for peppers. Let's go on to the next thing. Let's go to something that I'm not going to plant anymore. I'm going to talk about some grains, all right? So I'm going to talk about barley and wheat and oats, okay? I'm not going to plant those anymore, and I'll tell you why, and I'm going to tell you what we plant instead. You know, because we make our own bread, and so we want to reduce the amount of flour that we buy, and we've got a solution for that. But we've been trying over the last few years all sorts of grains to see how well they do. So here we've got, for instance, some barley and some wheat right here, okay? And here too, here's some purple barley. And then here we've got some oats. Now, I'm not going to be planting these anymore, even though I've enjoyed planting them, I've enjoyed growing them. I love to just take the berries off of here and eat them and chew on them. They're really nice, but they're just not very convenient. They're not, I mean, as you can see, the plant is very, very small. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of grain per plant. And it's not very tall, but it's tall enough that it falls over, and it's so short that it's very easily foraged by animals, very, very easily foraged. And each plant doesn't give you a whole bunch. And so you need just way, way too much space to be able to get enough oats or barley or wheat. What we plant instead, and grows really, really well, we plant millet, which we've got here, a whole bunch of it. This millet right here is still a little bit green, but I picked it green just as an experiment to see if it will ripen well. Okay, and then here's some ripe millet. Now this millet here is foxtail millet, but that's not the only grain we grow. We also grow different types of sorghum. So we've got some coral sorghum here, and right here I've got some Williams syrup sorghum right there, and got some sorghum from a subscriber who sent me seeds this past winter. His name's Robert Resnick. And this is a type of hybrid sorghum that only grows to 1.20 meters to about 4 feet tall. So it's really convenient, and it gives nice big heads. You see how big those heads are compared to, let's say, the coral sorghum or even the Williams sorghum. And so I'm looking forward to trying these seeds, but what I can tell you is the birds love them. and so which means they're probably going to be really, really good. And another one that the birds really love, and the birds really love they love all the sorghum. They go after all our sorghum, which is fine because, and then we also have some popping sorghum. This is alujola popping sorghum. Now, what's great about the millet and the sorghum is you see how big these heads are compared to these ones, okay? There's a huge difference, and yet a plant of millet doesn't take up much more space than a plant of wheat or barley or oats. But look at how much more we get. The sorghum might take up a little bit more space, but really not much. So for the space, you get a whole lot more. Plus the coral and the Williams and the alujola is really, really tall. And so it's a little bit harder for the animals to get at. And then the millet and the and Robert Resnick's sorghum, it's a bit shorter. It's about 4 feet tall, but still it works really well. And so we're gonna keep growing that, and I've done a whole bunch of videos on those, and I'm gonna be actually doing a video about specifically about sorghum. So I'm not gonna give you millet. So I'm not gonna be giving you too much advice today. But what I can say is, in a cold climate, it works better here, let's say here in Ontario or any cold climate, 5A, 5B, 6A, whatever. It works better if you plant them in small pots ahead of time, about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time. And you can plant several seeds in a pot because they're grass. They grow like grass. They don't mind being crowded. All of this sorghum you see here was all growing really crowded, and you saw how big the heads were. And so you start them in little pots about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time, and then you transplant them into the garden, because even when you sow the sorghum, when the soil is the right temperature, direct sowing it here, it just takes too long. It takes longer for them to germinate than they do when they're in pots. And when the soil is the right temperature, you can just transplant the 4 or 5 week old plants that are already that big, and so they're just going to grow a lot faster for you and give you a lot earlier harvest. Next, let's talk about something that I want to do differently. So let's talk about onions. Onions. Now, over the last few years, I've been growing onion sets, and I've been also growing onions from seed. Now, but before I talk to you about the onions, I want to talk to you about the context of how we garden, and that's a really, really important point. How I like to garden is I like to garden imitating nature, using biodiversity. If you've seen any of my videos, you've seen what my garden looks like, you can see that it's just full of all sorts of plants. There's not even a hint of monoculture there. And so I do a lot of companion planting, and once the plants are established, I let the weeds grow, because they end up doing some companion planting as well. And so, and also I don't water most of my gardens, depending on the conditions. There are a couple of small areas that need watering simply because of the soil conditions, but most of our gardens are placed in areas where there's water beneath the soil most of the year, even this year and during the drought, and so we don't water. We don't water, we do very little weeding, and so the plants need to be independent. And so what that means is, in some cases, things might end up being smaller. Like you can see, these onions aren't very big. We don't fertilize. Like I said, we don't weed. We'll do some mulching. We'll do some weeding, especially for onions. It's important to weed around your onions because they really don't like competition. But otherwise, the plants really need to be independent. And so, for example, in order to get like really big onions I've seen people grow, I think you have to do a lot of fertilizing. The only fertilizing I could say that we do is in the fall, we will add mushroom compost to our garden beds in the fall, and then we'll add on top of it, we'll put leaves if we've got them, and then in the spring we'll either rake those leaves off or we'll leave them on if we can. And that's what basically is going to be the fertilizer for the year. And we'll also use our weeds as mulch, and so those weeds are going to decompose and also be a sort of a fertilizer. Otherwise, our plants really, really need to be independent. And something like an onion, well, it just doesn't get as big when you're not really paying close attention to it, because there's so much work that we basically ignore our vegetables most of the time. And so, however, They might not get very big, these onions, but they are beautiful and they have more flavor than any onion that's 3, 4, 5 times bigger. These things have a lot of punch to them. A lot. They're really, really strong, and so you don't need to use as many. And so now, what is my advice about onions? What am I doing differently? Well, what I've done in the past is I've direct sown them. I have sown seeds in pots, and I've used onion sets. And I find, at least in a cold climate, in our short seasons here in our 5B, 6A garden, the season's just not long enough for onions sowed from seed to do well. At least not in the context where, you know, we don't do much weeding and stuff like that. If we were only growing onions, we could probably grow them from seed. And I find growing them from seed indoors, starting in January or February, it's just so long. It takes so long. It takes up space. You have to be watering them. And we end up getting these tiny little onions that kind of look like onion sets. Whereas these are from onion sets. You think, well, why didn't we get anything bigger? Well, like I said, they have to be, sometimes, some years they've been bigger, but this year, like, it was a drought year, and so they weren't as big, but we didn't water them. And so I consider they did pretty well for that. And so that's what we're doing as of next year. I'm not going to be sowing onion seeds anymore. I'm just going to be using onion sets. I'll still collect onion seeds, more for using as a spice in the kitchen, but sometimes I might still direct sow onions around other plants as companion plants, but not necessarily to get a harvest. So I just sort of broadcast the seeds, and whatever wants to grow, grows. And on that subject, let's talk about something that I'm going to be continuing to grow, and that is garlic. Nothing better than having a whole bunch of garlic. This year we got about 565 beautiful heads like that. These are some of the garlics that the garlic heads that I'm going to be dividing up and replanting in late October or early November. And we're going to keep planting those. And actually this year we did it differently, and our garlic was so much better. It was a lot more potent, a lot stronger this year as far as its flavor, and the bulbs were bigger. Often when you get bigger bulbs, your flavor's not as good. And so what was the difference this year from previous years? Well, I followed a subscriber's advice, the Olson Pine, who said it's not good for garlic, you know, because I always thought garlic needed a lot of water. So I put it in a spot of the garden a bit lower, that always, you know, that I never ever needed to water and so on, because it was always fairly damp there. But as a result, I learned in 2024, when my garlic was so wet right up to the last minute, right up to when I harvested it. You know, normally it's good to let your garlic dry a little before you harvest it, and I couldn't. And so the bulbs weren't as big, and they weren't as flavorful as they were, for example, this year. They were still excellent. I still loved them, but they could have been better. And this year they were much better, even though we got some of those leek moths. But the leek moths didn't do much damage. They just they hatched their eggs in the garlic scapes. I cut those off anyways to harvest them, to eat them. So they didn't affect the garlic whatsoever. So garlic is a great one to plant, and it's a great companion plant. I have it, you know, I have one area where I plant garlic every year, but I also will put a bit of garlic here and there throughout the garden as companion plants, and those ones I don't harvest. I just let them stay in the garden. So one garlic clove that grows into a garlic, if I leave it there, well, the following year, that little area will turn into 4 or 5 or 6 garlic plants. And each year it'll get bigger and bigger. You can harvest the greens as for salads or for cooking with as well, and leave the bulb underneath. And it also acts as a companion plant for the plants surrounding it. So there's one that we're going to keep growing. Now, let's go on to something we're not going to grow anymore. Let's see. So let's say for a no here. One thing that I'm not going to try growing anymore is regular spinach. Regular spinach, it just bolts way too quickly. Actually, I'd say in that same category is coriander or cilantro. Bolts way too quickly. And so for the amount of work of getting it started, getting it growing, you get very little harvest out of it before it bolts. There are lots of vegetables that can take their place. For instance, you got Swiss chard, which really tolerates the heat quite well. Swiss chard, obviously kale and cabbage and all those things, they replace it well. In the early spring, you got sorrel. And one thing I like to plant is something called Malabar spinach. Now, I don't have a whole lot of it with me. I don't have any of it here with me. I've got some growing. I'll see if I can put an image on there. It's a beautiful plant. It's a little bit different from spinach, but it's a leafy green. Its leaves are kind of full of water. It's very tropical. It's a tropical plant. It only grows like, obviously it's only going to grow in the summer. You have to. The frost kills it. A beautiful plant too. A nice deep green with some red and burgundy overtones in it as well. And it grows into a vine. You can have it grow over an arbor. It's quite beautiful, and its flowers are pink. And actually, its seeds can overwinter and survive the winter here, because this year I got some Malabar spinach volunteers, which was quite nice. So there's a really nice replacement for spinach, and essentially for spinach. For cilantro, a good replacement would be, it's not exactly the same flavor, obviously it's parsley, but it's the same type of, looks the same anyway, but the flavor is completely different. Although if you want a nice cilantro replacement to give it, to do the same sort of things with the different ones that replace it, would be, for example, something called tchepiche. It's a Mexican herb. Really, really nice. Dill is actually a good cilantro replacement, and dill actually grows quite well here. I like to always collect the seed. It's really nice to collect the seed, and I grow our dill with the tomatoes. It's a really great companion plant for tomatoes. Another one is, another good replacement for cilantro is mint, any type of mint. For example, cilantro is very popular in Thai cuisine, and something else that you often will always see going with cilantro or replacing it is our different types of mint, either mint or basil, I should say. So we have, for example, here we have 4 types of mint: apple mint, peppermint, spearmint, and wild mint. And we also have three types of basil: Thai basil, Genovese basil, and purple basil. And they all grow really well. For the basil, it's important, obviously, to start it in small pots. We started in early May, and then we transplant it out when it's really, really hot. So like end of June is when we're going to transplant the basil out into the garden, or mid to end of June. Around the same time, we transplant the watermelon. And basil is a great companion plant for watermelon. They grow really, really well together. It's also a good companion plant for tomatoes. Now, as far as mint's concerned, sometimes it's a good idea not to put the mint in the garden, because it can really, really spread. We have mint in our garden. I don't really mind it how it spreads, because we harvest a whole lot of it. And then when it's time, let's say we harvest a whole lot of it throughout the season, but mostly in the spring and in the fall. So late fall, we'll harvest a whole bunch of it. And then in the spring, in late spring, we'll harvest it. Well, all through the spring, we'll harvest it, because it's going to be ready early in the spring. And then what happens is, when we want to plant something where the mint is going, we'll just pull it all out. And then we'll take all those, and because it pulls out really easily, we'll take those roots and we'll take those leaves out, and then we're going to throw them somewhere where we're building the soil, where the soil is having a real rough time getting built. Well, mint will definitely be able to help us build the soil there, and then we'll plant in there. And that's what we've been doing with our watermelon in our main garden and our basil. Is we do that, we clear out the mint, we transplant the watermelon and the basil. It grows really well, and because we're clearing out the mint in about mid-June, what happens is the volunteer seeds for the ground cherries and cherry tomatoes that are there will also sprout at the same time, like maybe within a week of after we've transplanted the watermelon and the basil. The ground cherries and the cherry tomato volunteers will sprout, and they will be ready to harvest right around now in September, when the watermelon has long finished. And of course the basil's still growing, and those ground cherries and tomatoes love basil. So it really is a nice situation that really works well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Part 2 is coming soon, if it's not online already. Hope you learned something from it. If you enjoyed it, please share with your friends. Please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment or ask a question. I love to answer your questions and respond to your comments. And you know, when you do that, it's a real help. And in fact, I considered giving this message closer to the beginning of the video. You know, if you watch a lot of our videos and you really enjoy them and you'd like to see more and you'd like to encourage that these videos get done, then supporting us by giving it a like or subscribing if you haven't done that yet, or sharing it with your friends. And something else you can do now is you can hype them, you can hype the video. All that stuff basically is a real help. It'll really help us. It'll allow us to get more views, and with more views we might get more longer views because people who enjoy us might find us, and that will just help us out because we earn a little bit of money from these videos, and believe me, that's a real help. And so if you could help us out that way, we would really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.